Good evening everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jeremy and this evening I'm going to show you how to make a super moist chocolate cake, sort of like Charlie's Bakery moist. So let's get started immediately. So I'm going to start by sifting 1 3/4 cups of cake flour into my mixing bowl along with 3 teaspoons of baking powder. So you might think this is odd, I'm only going to use 1 spoon, but 1 tablespoon is the equivalent of 3 teaspoons. So there are my 3 teaspoons of baking powder. And to that I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup of cocoa. And you can see I'm also putting the cocoa through the sieve. This cocoa doesn't have many lumps, but very often cocoa is quite lumpy. So don't take a chance, just put it through the sieve. The last thing you want in your chocolate cake are cocoa lumps. Now to that I'm going to add 2 cups of sugar. Now you'll often see that recipes say you must throw your sugar through the sieve as well. Normal sugar doesn't go through a sieve. It doesn't fit, so if you want to do that you probably have to use caster sugar, but I'm not even going to attempt it. So 2 cups of sugar and just a pinch of salt. Oh, that's more than a pinch. And I'm just going to mix the dry ingredients slightly before I add the wet. Now to this I'm going to add 1 cup of full cream milk. I'm going to add half a cup of oil. I've used canola oil, but you could just use a normal sunflower oil, or you could even just use any vegetable oil. I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla essence. And I'm going to crack 2 eggs at room temperature into there as well. And I'm going to use a hand mixer to blend it for 2 minutes. Okay, so that's been 2 minutes. Now I'm going to take 1 cup of boiling water and I'm going to add it to the mixture. I'm going to throw it over the mixers so that I can get some of that mixture off. And then I'm going to mix the boiling water in by hand. Now you'll notice that the mixture is very thin. You'll see when I pour it in a second that it's really thin, and that is normal. If you want a moist cake, you're going to have a thin mixture. So I have sprayed and I have lined 2 pans. They're about 20 centimeters. They're quite shallow. This cake will stick. So I would advise you to get some baking paper. Do not use wax paper. Wax paper doesn't work. And I'm just going to divide the mixture between the 2 pans. And this mixture is going to go into a preheated oven for between 30 and 35 minutes. The oven was preheated to 180 degrees. It's been just over half an hour. Let's check if the cake is ready. Okay, so usually before you take this out of the oven, you would check if it's finished, but I'm sure it is. But the way you check is you take a toothpick and you just put it into the cake. And if it comes out clean, the cake is finished. So you just want to ensure that the cake is loose on the sides, because as I told you before, this cake is inclined to stick. I'm going to remove it immediately, but if you are not an experienced baker, then don't remove it straight away. Let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes before removing it. You can loosen the sides immediately though. If you don't have baking paper, then you want to use either butter or margarine, and you want to use your hand to make sure you grease your pans very, very well. And once you have greased them, you want to take a bit of flour and you want to dust them with flour as well as greasing them, otherwise your cake will stick. So I'm going to put it onto my hand. If you don't have experience doing that, or if your hand burns, then you can put it onto a plate. Take off the paper, and I'll show you again. Now I'm going to leave these cakes to rest until they are completely cold. Otherwise the icing will melt, and then I'll show you how to make icing in a little while. So the cakes have cooled down and now we're going to ice them. So I've never measured how much butter and how much sugar I use, so I'm going to guess and I'm going to measure today. I'm going to make a butter icing. And I'm going to start with, I've got 170 grams of butter in here. And to that, I'm going to add some icing sugar. And I'm just going to pour until it looks like the right amount. So I have 300 grams of icing sugar in there and a few dessert spoons of cocoa. So this is about 4 to 5 heaped teaspoons of cocoa. I like quite a dark icing. You will notice that I've sifted none of it because I'm going to mix it all with the butter. So what I want to do is all of this sugar and cocoa needs to get mixed with the butter. You could use an electric whisk, but if you use an electric whisk, you don't get such a nice final product. So I'm going to take little pieces of butter. I broke a piece of butter off, and I'm going to soften it against the side of the bowl. And as I soften it against the side of the bowl, it combines with the cocoa and with the icing sugar. So this is quite a slow process, and I'll probably spend the next 10 to 15 minutes doing this. But that's all I'm doing. I'll show you one more time. There's the block of butter. I'm taking off a little piece. There's the little piece. I'm softening it against the side, and I'm adding icing sugar and cocoa to it as I soften it. And I'm going to continue doing that until I've done it with all the butter and icing sugar in here. If your butter is room temperature, it usually works well, but it's quite a cold day. So room temperature was a bit warm, so it's going to take me quite a while. Okay, so I've creamed all the butter and sugar. On a hot day, or if I'd softened the butter in the microwave, it would have looked different from this. It would have looked a bit more like icing already. But I've mixed all of it together, and now I'm going to add some milk to make an icing that I can spread on the cake. So I can't give you an exact amount for the milk, because in summer you use a lot less milk than in winter. So you're going to add milk a little at a time until the icing starts coming together and it starts resembling icing. So I said earlier that you could have made this with the hand blender, and you can, but then you get a very, very different texture. And if you make it by hand like this, you get an icing that's almost fudgy. So the icing is done. I'm going to put some caramel between the layers. So let's start assembling the cake. So I'm going to start by putting a little bit of icing sugar on the bottom of the plate. You can use caster sugar. It just helps to prevent the cake from sticking to the bottom. It doesn't do anything else. Now, if you look at the two cakes, you can see that they are quite high in the middle. So I'm going to leave that one as is, but I'm going to put this at the bottom. So I'm going to flatten it slightly. Otherwise the cake won't sit on the plate. So I'm going to put caramel treat between the layers. Some people prefer jam, some people make enough icing so they can have icing between it and on top. Some people use cream, but I like caramel. I'm going to use approximately half a can, because there's no point in putting caramel on if you're not going to taste it. You could flatten the top if you want a prettier cake, but I don't mind the roundness at the top. The only reason I cut the roundness off at the bottom is if I didn't, my cake would not stand on this plate, it would be wobbling. Now, I have no talent when it comes to making things pretty. So my whole decorating style on cakes and on cupcakes is quite messy. And it works out. So I'm just going to put some icing on the top, but I'm not going to finish it off at all because I want to make sure that I've covered the sides. So there I've got a bit on the top, and I'm going to start with the sides. Now, you don't want a thick icing on the sides because it doesn't really serve any purpose other than to make the cake pretty on the sides, because an open cake with brown caramel doesn't look really good. So I'm just putting it on and spreading it as thinly as I can so that it's just covered everywhere. So now I've covered the sides. What I'm going to do on the top is I'm going to do that. Then it looks like the mess was intentional. So usually I would put on glitter or something, but it's lockdown, so I don't have anything, not even a cherry. So let's cut the cake and see what we have. There you have it. A moist chocolate cake with very, very chocolatey icing and caramel treat in the center. So I hope you enjoyed the recipe, and I hope you enjoy your chocolate cake. I will see you in a week's time with something new and exciting to make. Have a good evening. I'm going to have some chocolate cake now. Good night. See you soon.